Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I hope everyone can hear me okay. My name is Karen DiDonato. I am one of the Master Gardener volunteers from Wake County supporting NC State Extension. I don't know if you know much about the Master Gardener program, but we can be reached by phone Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. till noon, 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. You can also email us. You can even walk into the office on Carrier Drive here in Raleigh and present us with whatever problem you may be having. The Master Gardeners undergo a lot of initial training and then significant continuing education to bring you the newest, greatest, latest and greatest information on all things gardening. One thing I will mention is that applications are now being accepted for next year's class. I believe the deadline is August. So feel free to check out our website or reach out to us if you're interested in becoming a Master Gardener volunteer here in Wake County. So yes, today we'll be talking about super pollinators, specifically native bee pollinators, and how you can best support them in your own backyard. Gardening for pollinators and keeping, if you will, supporting native bee populations is one of my interests. As a Master Gardener, I also spend significant amounts of time at the Compost Learning Lab with vermicompost, composting with worms. And I'm also an orchardist. I relocated here to North Carolina about 3 years ago, just before COVID, from California, where I lived about 21 years in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, but we also had a 65-acre farm in Sonoma County, where I had many, many orchards and learned much, but I'm still getting used to the climate here. So stay tuned on that. So today I thought we'd talk a little bit, just touch a little bit on pollination, some facts about bees that you may or may not be aware of. So we're going to talk about the blue orchard mason bee, the leaf cutting bees, how to garden, how to best garden to encourage pollinators, and then how to establish a bee-friendly habitat all around in your backyard. So a little bit about pollination, if you'll recall from fourth grade, right? So pollination, what is pollination? The act of transferring pollen from the anther or the male part of the flower to the stigma or the female part. And in order for pollination to occur, the plants must be of the same species, right? So a lime tree cannot pollinate an apple tree. They do have to be of the same species. And pollination can be accomplished in a number of ways by wind. A lot of pollination happens just from the wind, but insects, birds, mammals, including humans. You may not be aware of this, but in parts of China, many parts of China and Japan, they have just eradicated their native pollinators. So specifically their apple and their pear crops have to be painstakingly pollinated by hand. I don't know if anyone has done that here. I have a lemon and lime tree that I bring in for the winter for a few months using Q-tips or paintbrushes, and you try to transfer the pollen. It's time consuming. It's very delicate work. But here in North Carolina, what I've found even better than hand pollination is dragging my lemon and lime tree out to the porch on the days where it is warm. And why do I do that? Well, that's because bumblebees can actually fly and are active at anything north of 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Honeybees are not active till it's about 55. But if we get a day where it spikes, January, February, bring your citrus outside and the bees will do the pollinating for you. It's so much better than that hand pollination. But do keep in mind, there are some economies in the world that are losing their pollinators. And as a result, the only method they have available is hand pollination. So here are your common backyard pollinators. Bees, everyone's familiar with the bees, butterflies, but birds, hummingbirds, specifically the smaller birds, bats, beetles, flies, wasps, ants, and moths all contribute to pollination. And don't be sleeping on those beetles. This picture here on the left I took earlier this spring on one of my Asian pear trees. And when I take a picture and I intend to use it in a presentation, I like to know when I'm speaking my content. So I looked up this beetle and I could not locate it anywhere. All the resources I had, I could not identify this beetle. So I reached out to our master gardener guru, Louise Romanel, and texted her this picture. I'm like, can you identify this? Can you help me with this? Took her a few minutes. Louise got back to me. And as it turns out, this was a maculated scarab beetle, very rare indeed. And she said, we all, you, Karen, specifically, but we all need to be on iNaturalist. It's more a crowdsourcing way to identify insects, plants, but really nifty tool. And they want to know when you saw it, what time of year, the date, the place. So really, really cool. So yeah, that there is a beetle pollinating my Asian pear trees. And then on the right, just the zebra swallowtail. I caught him just as he was flying off one of my blackberry bushes. So moving on, we'll drill down to bees. Bees are the order Hymenoptera. And bees, along with wasps and sawflies and ants, make up that order. So a few bee facts by the numbers. So there are two bee kingdoms. So if you remember, again, from that fourth grade science class, the kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, right? There are two bee kingdoms, social bees and solitary bees. Social bees have very designated duties in their 6-week life. So if you take, for instance, the honeybee, right, there's one queen and her job is to lay eggs, right? There's a handful of drones or the males, their job is to go out and mate with other queen bees. And then the balance of that hive are the female worker bees, and their job, right, is to defend the hive, raise the young, and gather pollen. Solitary bees, on the other hand, they live anywhere from just over or under a full year. And they, specifically the females, they perform all jobs because there's no one else to perform those. So not only do they have to, they mate, they lay the eggs, they provision the eggs, they make the nest, they are just working nonstop doing everything. So in North America, there's approximately 4,000 native bee species. Of those, we know that 50% are in decline, and 25% are at risk for extinction. So it's really important that we do our best to support these backyard pollinators. And that translates, I'm sure you've heard this statistic, but one of every 3 bites of food we take in as Americans is the result of a plant being pollinated by a bee. Male bees do not sting. Do you know that? Same with mosquitoes. Male mosquitoes do not bite. They just feed on nectar. Male bees do not sting. Why is that? The stinger is a modified egg-laying device that only the females have. So if you're ever stung by a bee, you can blame it on the woman. All right. Now, it wouldn't be a pollination presentation if we didn't give a little bit of time to the Apis mellifera, the honeybee, the European honeybee. So I will take just a little bit. Honeybees have been amazing partners to human beings throughout history. In fact, aside from man, it is the number 2 most studied organism on the planet, the honeybee. And Apis mellifera, their scientific name, Apis has Egyptian roots, and it's derived from the Greek word meaning to swarm, and mellifera, which is Latin for honey gathering. So honeybees are not native to North America, right? They were introduced here by the European settlers in the 17th century. And of the worldwide approximately 20,000 species of bees, only the Apis make honey, right? So Apis are the bumblebees and the honeybees. A honeybee queen can lay 2,000 to 3,000 eggs per day. She can live anywhere from 2 to 4 years, whereas I mentioned before, the worker bees, they live approximately 6 weeks. Foraging honeybees travel about 55,000 miles to generate 1 pound of honey. And I'll put this in perspective to you. I spent most of my career traveling the world for work. I was in biotech, and I tell my children this when they just want to, can I just use your miles, Mom? Can I just use your miles to go here? Well, 90,000 miles for a trip, that's a lot of trips to fly. So 55,000 miles is approximately 11 or 12 round trip, coast to coast, round trip flights, right? For 1 pound of honey. That means San Francisco to New York and back 12 times just, for these bees to give you 1 pound of honey. So remember that next time you're having your honey on your muffin or honey nut Cheerios. Honeybees fly up to 15 miles per hour, and they beat their wings about 12,000 times a minute, which gives them that familiar buzz sound. Honeybees contribute greatly to our gross domestic product, accounting for nearly 80% of commercial crop pollination here in the US. And why is that? It's because we transport the hives right? We wrap them up. We can put this big bungee cords around them and we can transport them from field to field, and they can facilitate the pollination of the orchards and the crops. As I said, the honeybees are active anytime it's over about 54 or 55 degrees Fahrenheit. But those bumblebees, they'll go out anytime it's over 40. You got those big fur coats. But the honeybee, has not been without as great of a partner it's been for humankind. It's not been without its challenges, right? They are actually not the most effective pollinator. And why is that? Because you see from this picture here, they're very neat. They're very tidy. They tuck the pollen in the little pockets behind their knees, right? And they've always struggled with threats ever since we've been maintaining honeybees, right? Parasites like the varroa mite or nosemia. There's bacterial diseases such as foul brood and fungal diseases such as chalk brood. There's even some viral diseases that can cause paralysis in bees. Sure, if you've picked up a newspaper in the last 10 years, I'm sure you've read about colony collapse disorder, right? Which is resulting in an annual hive loss of 30 to 40% specific to the honeybees. And scientists are a little perplexed. We don't yet know why. There are a lot of theories. Some thought it was the cell phone towers. Maybe it's the GMO crops. Is it a class of pesticides we're using? Is it climate change altogether? We still don't know. We still don't have this pinned down, but we are losing hives at an alarming rate. And as a result, interest in our native bee populations has skyrocketed. As they say in Hollywood, I think the mason bees are having a moment last decade or so. Okay. So let's talk about these little guys. Osmia lignaria, the blue orchard mason bee. They have a lot of names. The orchard bee, the mason bee, the blue orchard mason bee. Really fascinating little creatures. So they come from the family Megachilidae, which means great jaw or large jaw, as do the leaf cutting bees we'll talk about in a moment. And the great jaw of these bees, even though they're tiny, they're the size of a housefly. They're about half the size of a honeybee, but they need to go and they scrape up clay and mud to use as partitions in between their eggs. And that's why they're called mason bees, but that's with the help of their great jaw. They are native to all of North America and can be found in every state except Florida at the moment. They are solitary bees, and they build their nests in cracks, hollow stems, and cavities that have already been borne out by other animals or insects. In North Carolina, there are 7 species of mason bees. All of them are metallic blue or metallic green. They're beautiful, beautiful little bees. Mason bees are gentle, so gentle. They do not sting. They have no interest in, they don't care how close you get to their nest. They don't care if you play around with the nest or the tubes. They are all about going about their business, and they'll just go right by you. Some, especially when they first hatch, they'll crawl all over you. They're really friendly little bees. As I said, they're called mason bees because they use the clay and the mud as partitions for the eggs. And each tube, and we'll talk a little bit about that, holds about 5 to 7 cocoons. The males are much smaller than the females. If you need to know the difference, on the left there, you can see the 2 sizes of the cocoons. On the left is the male cocoon, the right is the female, and that's a picture of the male down in the lower right-hand corner. They have very fuzzy faces. So if you're looking, you can not only tell by their physical size, the males are much smaller, but their faces are much fuzzier. And they are very important commercial pollinators. This is the first year that I started keeping year-round, or I guess keeping is the right word. I've always had honeybees, but I've started with the mason bees. And can I just share with you my blueberries? I have 25, 30 blueberry shrubs. It was amazing. I was literally cutting fruit and been thinning fruit nonstop because the pollination efforts of these bees is just next level. So here's a few pictures, all of mason bees, all in North Carolina. And you can see by the bright colored flowers, these mason bees are what's known as polyleges, which means they will take nectar from many plant families, not just one. There are some bees that are restricted, mostly in the desert. They are restricted to only one. Those are called oleages, but mason bees are polyleges. So a little bit about their life cycle, right? So in early spring, very early spring, February, if you will, I guess it's technically still winter in February, but anytime the outside temperature reached 55 degrees Fahrenheit for approximately 3 consecutive days, and as you know, we hit that even sometimes in January, but this year it was February, the male mason bees will chew through their cocoons. And interestingly, when the mama mason bee is laying her eggs, she can determine the sex of the bee. And what she will do is she will put the females, the important ones, in the back of the tube where they're more protected. And she'll lay more females. And the males she will lay on the outside of the tube, because if a predator, a bird, the ants, whatever, the wasps get in to attack that tube, they hit the males first. And you'll learn here in just a moment why the male's a little bit more expendable. So the females hatch a few days. Once the male bees eat through the cocoon, that opens up the way for the other males and the females to come through. Females hatch a few days later, and immediately upon eruption from their cocoon, they mate. In fact, the males will hang out on, if you watch them, which I do daily during mason bee season, they will hang out on the nest waiting for those females to hatch. As soon as they mate, multiple times, usually with different females, the male bees will then die. The female bees then will fly away, feed herself on the nectar, waiting for her ovaries to mature. And then she will come back searching for a nest. And if she finds everything that she needs close by her chosen nest site, which is pollen, nectar, mud, water, she will lay approximately 30 to 35 eggs over the next 6 to 8 weeks. And the really neat thing about mason bees is they prefer to nest where they themselves hatched. So if you can support them and bee hotel, have a bee house, do what you can with your pollinator plantings, they will stay. They will stay. And they're just fascinating to watch. Safe for kids. Again, they don't sting. They're just friendly little bees. 2 to 4 eggs a day is approximately equivalent to 2,500 to 5,000 flower visits. They are workers. So here's just another look at the life cycle. Now, this is for the mason bees. The leaf-cutting bees we'll talk about in a minute. This timing is frame shifted a bit. The mason bees, as I said, will start in February, early March, and they respond to particular temperature cues. So 55 degrees, that's when the mason bees come out. The leaf-cutter bees, they also hatch in response to particular temperature cues, but it needs to be over 75 for them. So they don't hatch till much later in the summer. But as you can see here, about 1 o'clock on the circle, immediately they mate. When they hatch, the female then begins searching for a nest and will provision each egg with pollen and nectar and her saliva, and she puts it in a little ball and then lays the egg right in the middle of that mass. And then she will wall off that egg with mud and clay and start again. You can see that there in the lower right. The larvae, once they hit the larval stage, they will feed on that pollen ball, and then they will actually pupate, and then they will spend the overwintering completely as adults, fully formed adults overwinter. And then again, in response to the temperature cues in the very early spring is when they chew through. Mason bees are master pollinators. Look at this guy. He is covered with pollen. He is the size of a housefly, so he can get into all the intricate little flowers and just pollinate everything. Again, the apples, you would not have believed the apples that I had to pick off my tree and thin off the trees from these pollinators. Just, I've never seen anything like it. What else? So an estimated 90, they are orders of magnitude improved pollinators over honeybees. And I don't like to compare them side by side, but truth be told, an estimated 99% of flowers landed on by mason bees will get pollinated versus only about 15 a day for honeybees. So mason bees will only forage in a 300-foot radius from their nest, about the length of a football field. Right? So they appear in early spring, and first their ideal fruit or their ideal food are the fruit trees. Plums, blueberries, apples, pears, apricots, cherries, all the early fruits are their favorite foods. And they are tireless workers. As I said, they will sit on their nests and wait for the sun to warm them up because they can't fly until it gets about 50 degrees, but they'll just sit there waiting for the sun to warm them up in the spring, and then they will go until sundown. Just tireless workers. In the literature, they're all over the place with the pollination rates, but the literature will quote pollination rates anywhere from 120 to 200 times better than a honeybee. All right, moving on to the leaf-cutting bees. Also the family Megachilidae, they are native to the US and Canada. These are another solitary species, gentle solitary species that nest in narrow cavities, hollow wood stems, or even in the ground. In North Carolina, there are actually 37 species of leaf-cutting bees, and all are about the size of a honeybee. They're black and cream stripe on their abdomen. So they very much resemble a honeybee, but you can tell because they're cream and the stripes on their back are all of the same width, whereas the honeybee, you see more of a gradation along their abdomen of the yellow and the black. As I said, they are very unlikely to sting, very, very gentle. And instead of using mud to partition off and protect their eggs and their pollen mass, the leaf-cutting bees, they use leaves. They use leaves of their favorite plants and soft flower petals. One of their favorite are the roses. They also like string bean plants to make those cocoons. I'll show you some pictures. So as I said, in midsummer, when the outside temperatures are reliably over 75, this is when you will see leaf. I put my leaf cutter bees out about 2 weeks ago, maybe 2.5 weeks ago, and right now they are all hatched. Similar to the mason bees, they just chew right through their cocoons, males first, then the females, and they are out and about. Females hatching just a few days later. Again, the leaf-cutting bees, they do prefer to be in close proximity to their nest, and they will not go more than 300 feet from their nest. So all of their nesting resources and materials need to be in close proximity. They don't lay quite as many eggs, I think, because there's more work involved, but they will lay 10 to 15 eggs in their 6 to 8 week life, the females. So if you've ever been in your garden and you see leaves, like you see here, I think these are rose bushes, but perfect cut out little circles. That's the work of a leaf cutting bee. Right. And you'll know there are other insects, pests, if you will, when the margins are very uneven. But when you see that perfect cut circle, chances are it's a leaf cutter bee. And they love vegetable garden. They love the leaves of tomatoes, beans, cucumbers, squash, peppers, and brambleberries. But you should not fear these bees. They are not going to destroy your crop. They only take tiny little pieces and not many of them. So they are certainly safe around your garden. And as I said, they are exceptional pollinators because they also need that nectar and the pollen for their eggs. All right. Now we'll talk a little bit more about the gardening aspect, right? So nectar is the primary carbohydrate source for bees. And the bees aren't picky about their nectar, but they are limited. They are limited by their body size, where they can fit, right? The length of their tongue and seasonality, right? So for those service berries and the beautiful red buds, the leaf-cutting bees are never going to get to those flowers. They're never going to see them because they don't hatch until July, and those flowers are all gone. So there are some limitations. But pollen, conversely, is the primary protein source for the larval bees. It's also consumed by the egg-laying females and some of the young adults. Both the mason and leaf-cutter bees, as I said, they're considered polyleges. They forage on plants from many different families, and they vastly prefer shades of blue, purple, and yellow, like many pollinators. So when you're thinking about planting, keep this in mind. So in supporting your backyard bee populations, you'll notice here a lot of purple, blue, and yellow or orange. So these are the top, and I like to always plant native pollinator plants for North Carolina. And these are the spring blooming. So these are the ones that are going to support the mason bee. So Baptisia, right, the wild indigo, echinacea, or the purple coneflower, absolutely one of their favorites. Every yard should have purple coneflower. They're beautiful. And oh my gosh, pollinators just love them. Asters, bee balm. My bee balm is just about dying out now, or one of my bee balm, but boy, do they get their money's worth out of the bee balm. And then the lance leaf blanket flowers. And we have lists as master gardeners. You can always reach out to us. We have long list of native plants, native flowers, native shrubs, native trees, all of which can help support these backyard pollinators. So if you're looking to support also the leaf cutting bees, right, the milkweeds, I know a lot of folks plant those for the monarchs, but they're also very favorite food of the leaf cutting beans. St. John's wort, liatris, blazing star, my liatris. You'll see a lot of liatris pictures in here just because they are all over my liatris. Great blue lobelia, and then Culver's root is another one we highly recommend. So other trees to support mason and leaf cutting bees in your backyard, as I said, the red bud. And why is that? Because it flowers very, very early. It's very bright. It's one of their favorite colors. The pawpaw tree actually is another one of their favorites, also native. Serviceberry, plum, and not necessarily the Japanese plum, but the domestic plum. And what I'm actually trialing in my yard, I'll maybe come back and give you an update, is what's called a Bruce plum, which is a hybrid between a Japanese plum and the native Chickasaw, right? So these are supposed to be very disease resistant. And I did see the bees on the flowers. So we'll see how those plums do here in the triangle. But yeah, it's Bruce plum. You might want to try that. It's a dwarfish, so it doesn't get really big. Oak leaf hydrangea, Georgia savory, green hawthorn, and of course, sunflower. All right, now let's switch over to how to establish a bee-friendly habitat. See, that's a picture of one of my nests there with the little mason bee going in. Oh. Okay, so I've given this presentation a number of times, but I'm always interested in feedback. So please give me your feedback. I was giving it to a gardening club in Holly Springs a few weeks ago. And at the end of the presentation, one of the members said, that just seems so complicated. And I just put if it seems complicated, then I've failed. I've failed miserably because I want this to be as simple as possible because it is not complicated, right? So here I have 5 easy steps to creating a bee haven. If you do nothing else, just do these 5 things and we're on a great path. Right? So add one native plant to your yard. Ideally, one of the ones I mentioned that is not just native, but can service your backyard pollinators, right? Grow one kind of food. Dispose of one pesticide, herbicide, or chemical fertilizer. Just raise your tolerance for imperfect landscape or imperfect fruit. I do try to grow everything I have organically. It's very challenging with some of the apples and pears, but you have to try, but just do away with one and maybe let that one weed live. Nature has this amazing way of balancing itself out. Again, I've been an orchardist for many years and you will see fruit trees attacked by aphids, but you know what? Next week, the ladybugs are all over them. And then the Japanese beetles come and something takes them out. So it works out. Nature has an amazing way of rebalancing. So just raise a little bit lower your expectations for the perfect garden and raise your tolerance for imperfect fruit, flowers, plantings. As I said, allow one pest to live because it's food for another pest or another beneficial insect, perhaps. And set up a mason bee house. And why I say I'm not giving preference to the mason bees, but the leafcutter bees use the mason bee houses as well. We just call them mason bee houses. All right. There are 3 primary structures for mason bee houses. There are solid wood blocks, stacked wood trays, and then containers of hollow reeds or tubes. And each of these has their own pros and cons. And I'm just going to go very quickly high level. So the one on the left, that's a solid wood block with just drilled holes. So I'm going to pull this one out. So I hope that's okay. Yeah. Okay. So this one I bring along with me. You can see it as what not to buy. Right, this is the impulse buy when you're in line at a big box store. You don't see how thin it is. Right. So what you want to do to encourage the native pollinators is, let's see. You want to be mindful of the types of tubes you're using. And there are just a couple of critical elements. And I'll hold this one up as well. If you can see, this is a mason bee box and I've got some tubes and pine cones. All right, there we go, already in there. So you want your tubes to be about 6 inches in length. That's ideal. You want your tubes to have a closed node at one end. So there's only 2 types of commercially available tubes that you can find, or natural reeds, which this is a natural reed, and then there's bamboo. Bamboo is a little tough, and we'll talk about that in a minute. It works, but if you're like I do, if you harvest these for the winter and you overwinter them in your refrigerator, bamboo is really tough to crack open. What you don't want is these little short knobby guys with really wide openings, because mason bees, they will search for the reeds the tubes with 8 millimeter entryways, and the leafcutter bees prefer slightly smaller 6 millimeter, but they will use the 8 millimeter if nothing else is available. So 6 inches in length, approximately 6 to 8 millimeter diameter for the opening. And you do want something that is tough, but not too tough. And please don't use the cardboard tubes. Why? They are not weatherproof. They just melt and unravel in the rain. And this is a favorite of the birds to just pick out. It's like a game to them. They will pick them out and eat all the little bees in there. So don't use the cardboard tubes. But this one, it doesn't really have any of those characteristics. These little tubes, I think they're plastic. I don't even know what they are, but they're hard as a rock. The openings aren't quite the right size, and they're just not long enough. Right. So try to avoid these. And these are not expensive. Make your own. They're simple. My husband built me this. Super, super easy to make. I had several of these outside of my orchards and had tremendous results. So right now I'm on track probably for 350 to 400 cocoons to harvest at the end of this year. And we can talk about that a little bit later. So the one on the lower left, that's actually not as long as those holes are about 6 inches deep, that one will work. The problem with those types of houses is you have to replace them every year because they get contaminated. You cannot reuse. You do not want bees reusing the old tubes because they get diseases. And we really don't need that type of disease pressure for the insects that are already struggling to survive. So those are fine, but you will need to get a new one every year. The one in the middle is fabulous. Those are the stacked wood trays. I have a number of those as well. If you're just looking to support your backyard populations, you don't need the stacked trays. The advantage of the stacked trays is when you go to harvest. And when you go to harvest, they just open up, and then you have access to the cocoons. And then you can scrub these. You can scrub these with bleach each season and send out new, clean, stacked wood trays. So those work well if you're going all in and you really want to do everything you can, as I said, and that's a different presentation altogether. But what most folks opt for, and I think which works well for most backyards, is this picture here on the right, which is just a very simple wood nest. It has an overhang, to protect them from the rain and the wind. And, you don't have to buy 200 tubes, buy 50 tubes, start there. And you just stuff the rest with branches and pine cones or whatever you can find. But you do want those tubes to be in there pretty snugly, so birds don't come out or squirrels don't come in and pick them off. Okay, next slide. So I also use combination houses, which you see here. The one on the left, same one, just up close on the right. Mason bees love them. Okay, and just here's some pictures I took just this past spring. You saw there were, from the last slide, none of the tubes were filled when I put them out in February. By March, I had a few. And you can see that they're capped there on the left, in the lower left, with different color. So they're using mud and clay at different locations, different times of the rainy period. So yeah, you can see a lot of that red clay, but there's also some white and brown mud. By April, I think I had approximately half of the tubes filled. And again, in each tube, the mason bee will lay 5 to 7 eggs or cocoons. So think of my harvest next year. So excited. And then by late May, early June, every single one of my tubes was filled. They filled every one of the tubes I had in one of my nests, and started to fill the block holes as well. So super excited for next February. I may even have some to share. Okay, so just trying to keep this simple. Bee hotel checklist. We talked about some of the pros and cons, but they will need shelter, right? So you want the nest with the overhang, and you want to mount the nest at least 5 feet off the ground. I think 4 to 5 feet is perfect because it's really fun to watch these guys. Just if you can get them eye level, ideal, or even get up on a ladder. One of the really nice places to mount these is if you have a shed or a garage with an eaves that hangs over and can provide them that protection. Perfect. As I said, the nesting materials must be clean. So if you're using a nest that has the drilled holes, you should replace it entirely, the entire unit every year. If you're using the house style with the tubes, once the bees hatch, you should put in fresh tubes. So the female bees have clean tubes for their new nests. As we already went through this, select the high quality tubes. Please avoid the tubes made of cardboard. And you can find all of this in any, Amazon. Some of the box stores have them, and I know some of the better gardening stores carry provisions as well for mason and leaf cutting bees. Tubes should be 6 inches long, 6 millimeter to 8 millimeter diameter. Please do face your bee nest into the sun. They like to face the sunrise. They need the sun's warmth in the morning. Remember, these mason bees are coming out in February, and it's cold. It's cold in the morning, right? Sometimes it's freezing, literally freezing. So you just want them facing the sun. They sit there until they can warm up in the sun, and like honeybees, and then they take off. Afternoon shade is okay, and sometimes they actually appreciate that. And we, of course, want the landscape to include all the resources that they need. So a pollen source, a nectar source, mud. What I actually ended up doing was just digging out a little hole, and every couple of days, if it didn't rain, which I don't even think I have ever had to wet this thing because we got so much rain this spring, but just keep it moist, keep a little bit of mud close to their nest so they have it. Leaves and flower petals. And we want to make sure all of these are available within 300 feet of the nest. And then they will come back year after year, right? So native bees are all around us in North Carolina. Chances are you can attract them to your yard with adequate accommodations, including targeted plantings. For a head start, you might also consider purchasing a few starter reeds. Some companies will sell the reeds with the tubes already, the cocoons, or they'll just sell the whole reed with the cocoons in them, and you keep them in your refrigerator until February or March, and then you just very carefully take them out and put them in the nest, and nature does the rest. Not expensive at all. Or you can purchase cocoons, just loose cocoons, and then you can put those in a little hatchery, and you just put the cocoons in there, put the little hatchery in here, and nature does, when they chew their way through, and they're protected, right? They can crawl out, they can fly out, but predators can't really get in. So that's another option there as well. And remember, the female bees, the mason bees, they like to nest where they themselves hatched. So if you build the nest and you have provisions for them, they will stick around. And they are really fun to watch and so safe for kids, so fun. Okay, well, here's my references. And thank you. Happy to answer any questions anyone may have.
Okay, great. So we did have a few questions come in. Somebody says, I know the TD tree is toxic to bee larvae, as is Carolina jessamine, yet I have been encouraged to plant both. I'm a backyard beekeeper, and I'm a little stunned by this point of view. What do you have to say about planting? Well, these trees they're native, but... Right.
I don't know that I would worry about planting native trees because the bees are native, and they've clearly learned over the millennia to stay away from poisonous plants. So I think nature will take its course there, and they will just avoid anything that's going to harm them.
Okay, sure. Someone was asking and I already know the answer to this question, but if you've seen the bee motel we have out in our garden here at the JCRA.
I haven't.
She has not. So that's okay. Something.
Maybe you can show me after the presentation.
Yeah, we're gonna take a little field trip out to the garden before she goes home, so we can see at least that wonderful gem in our garden.
Great.
Awesome. Okay, so someone says, my understanding is that the honeybee is not endangered nor in danger of extinction, unlike our native bees. More honeybees globally now than ever before. I believe recent research also suggests that backyard beekeeping is actually damaging to native bees due to honeybees taking resources from and spreading diseases to native bees. So is backyard beekeeping actually helping the ecosystem / environment?
So this presentation was about native beekeeping, right? So that is not harming our environment. You are correct. I don't believe honeybees are at risk of extinction. I don't think they're on that list. I don't think they're the 1 in 4, and I don't believe they're represented in the 50%. I know in this country, the hives are declining, and they're struggling to figure out why. yes, an argument could be made that a non-native species such as the European honeybee could be taking resources away. I also like to think, though, if we're doing our diligence with our planting, there's plenty of, I know in my yard, because again, I've got orchards, plenty of nectar and pollen to go around. But I don't want to discourage. I love honeybees as well. I actually have kept honeybees for many years. Hurricane Ian blew over my last hive, and I didn't actually replace it yet because I got so enthralled by the mason bees and the leaf cutting bees. So I don't know, TBD on what I'll do with the honeybees. They're a lot of work. They're fascinating. They're fun. Loved it. And they did the job pollinating, but not even close to what these mason bees have done. So that's a great point. But no, I don't think honeybees are at risk of extinction.
Great. Okay. Someone asked, well, I often see circular cutouts in my red bud leaves. Would that be leaf cutter bees? And I think in your presentation, you said probably
Most
yes.
likely, yeah.
Do the leaf cutter bees have a preference for any particular species, or is just any leaf?
They do.
Oh.
No, they do. Soft, pliable. And I didn't put that list up here. Maybe I should. Roses. I think red bud may have been on that list.
Sure.
I mean, they will take anything available. They do have their preference because they want it soft and pliable.
Gotcha.
They're a little picky about their building construction materials.
Fair enough.
Rightfully
Yeah.
so, if they've got an option.
Right. Definitely. Okay. Someone's asking, why do mason bees not live in Florida?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think it's because it doesn't get cold enough. So mason bees here will stay outside all year. So in the wild, the mason bees have a survival rate about 30 to 40%, right? So 30 to 40% of the eggs that the females lay will then again hatch and reproduce. If human intervenes and help them along, right? So what I will do is, so I just brought my mason bee tubes in. When I put my leaf cutter bees out about 2-3 weeks ago, I gathered up all the tubes that are filled and I put them in a big organza bag, so no predators can get to them, and they will stay because they're pupating now. They will stay in my garage where they need the warm temperatures. It's unconditioned, but they need those temperatures until anywhere from October to December, at which point I will harvest the cocoons. I'll crack each of these tubes and I'll clean and harvest the cocoons, and I will keep them in my refrigerator until February and March when I start to release them. And that gets me pretty close to 95% survival rate. So maybe doubling what it is in nature.
Okay. And people are asking, like, why are you harvesting the cocoons? And they're also asking, are you harvesting just to clean them? So if you just want to speak a little bit about what the impetus is for that. Right.
So if you leave your nest outside all year long, there will be losses. Right. Ants will get in there. There's a lot of predatory wasps that's why you don't want to use the cardboard tubes, because those wasps can get their egg laying devices right through the cardboard. And what they're very sneaky, they'll lay their little larvae who then eat the bee larvae as food. And then when they're big enough, they eat their way out of that cocoon. So they will decimate that entire tube of bees. But if you leave your bees out in the wild, again, the survival rate is about 30 to 40% in aggregate. But when you harvest them, you protect them from the predators in the organza bag, right? So all of my tubes, when I collected them, they were clean and they were still capped. And you have to leave them because they go through their larval stage. You don't want to move them when they're in their early larval stage because you could dislodge the egg from the pollen mass. So you leave them, they're done. As I said, she's done in April, May, and June, those eggs are laid. And about July, or late June, I will harvest them and I will keep them all upright. So the egg continues to be in contact with that pollen mass. So their food, they're not dislodged from their food. And then I will store them in my garage in an organza bag upright until the fall, at which point, I will harvest them. Why do I do that? Well, I like to increase their odds of survival from 30 to above 90. I have orchards that I, pollinate. I have friends with fruit trees who would appreciate at some point soon here, I'll be giving away cocoons to folks who, are like-minded or have fruit trees or just love watching the mason bee or teaching their children about mason bees. So that's why I do it. It's fun too. They're so fun to watch.
That's awesome. Yeah. Somebody was asking if you could recommend the easiest method for protecting nesting boxes kept outside in the winter. And I'm wondering if harvesting cocoons rather than worrying about overwintering is the way to go.
Yeah. It is not hard to harvest the cocoons. It maybe takes an hour or two out of your day, like winter wide. It's not time consuming at all. You do need a little space because very little space in your garage. One of the best things you can do, and you may have seen in one of my pictures, because I learned the hard way, the mockingbirds pulled every one of my tubes out last year. To put a little, some hardware cloth. I actually, on one of my nests, I used hardware cloth. On the other, I used the pliable deer fencing. And then I just put 2 nails on the side and just wrapped it around. That way squirrels and birds couldn't get through. It certainly protects it from any large predator. So that's one good way. The other way is you just want to make sure your nest has sufficient overhang to protect it from the wind and the rain, at least 2-inch overhang. You're never going to be able to protect it from all of the predatory insects unless you bring it inside and like put it, as I said, in one of those organza bags. I think they cost like $3 or $4. I think it's worth it. And then ideally, if you become an enthusiast and you are interested in harvesting the cocoons, that's a great way to preserve not only preserve the nest or the cocoons for next season, but you propagate it, right? So that there's a great likelihood they're going to stick around your yard. If you release them again near the nest and it's clean, it's fun. They're really, really fun to watch.
It sounds like fun.
Yeah.
A couple of people are expressing concerns about carpenter bees, and they're wondering if they put up tubes under the eaves of their shed that they'll just attract carpenter bees and it'll destroy their trim. What do you have to say about that?
So carpenter bees are the ones that actually drill the holes. And if you're buying the right tubes, carpenter bees can't really fit in here. They're big, right? They're bigger than bumblebees, and these little mason bees and leafcutter bees can fit in the 6 millimeter. This is not the ideal nesting site for carpenter bees.
But if you put tubes that were a little bit larger for carpenter bees, would they go to those rather than drilling holes into your?
Oh, maybe that's a good question. I don't know much about carpenter bees other than fair. They're a nuisance to a lot of people. Sorry.
No worries. Absolutely. So someone's asking, does it matter what kind of log to use for your drilled hole house, softwood versus hardwood, anything like that?
I think either will work. The bees will use whatever they find in nature, and there's a mix of softwoods and hardwoods. So whatever's easiest for you. I would think hardwood, I don't know, maybe fewer predators can eat through there, but either one is fine.
Cool. Okay. And just one more time for clarification, someone's asking, what time of year do you bring in the nesting boxes or tubes?
You want them so approximately 1 month after the last eggs were laid.
Okay.
So the female bees will work again from February, March, April, and May. So I would say early mid-June in this area is a good time to bring them in. That's when I bring mine in. And again, because you want that 1 month of maturation of the larval bee so he's not separated from his food source. And you do want to try and keep the tubes upright when you're moving them.
Awesome. Well, this has been absolutely wonderful, Karen. Thank you so much for pulling this presentation together for us and sharing your passion for native bees with us. Only a little bit. It only came out just a little bit.
Usually I'm standing and I'm all over the place. And I'm asking how it's more interactive, but I hope you learned a little bit. Sorry, it's not more interactive, but.
Oh, no worries. Well, you're welcome everybody at home that we got her sitting down so she's not moving all over the place. But thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. And thank you for all of your questions. We will be doing another Master Gardener presentation next month on the 24th of July. We do not have a topic picked out for that one yet, so it will be a fun little surprise for all of us. So I hope we will see you all then. Y'all take care.
Thank you.